I welcome you back to Stanford, alumni and alumni, for the reunion homecoming, and feel very honored and privileged to be able to address you this morning on the topic of finding the meaning of life in novels. A rather presumptuous title, but in less than 1 hour, I hope that I can lecture to you for about half of the time about a few novels. We can then have a discussion, and we can all walk out of here clearly having found the meaning of life. I do actually think that's ultimately what novelists are up to, helping us look at the human condition in all of its beauty and its ugliness, and exploring moral questions of virtue and vice, of character, asking why we're here, and what we're meant to do, pointing us towards visions of the good life, the worthy life, a life well lived, beyond temptations, failings, emptiness that we all experience so much of the time. And so I think novelists are indeed helping us explore the meaning of life. But novelists rarely give us direct answers to questions of meaning and purpose. Great novelists aren't polemicists, they aren't moralists or dogmatists. They hold people up as jewels to the light and turning them around in all of their facets, both blemished and pure, even as they may point tentatively to an internal glow that may lie beneath the surface. And liberal arts education at Stanford and other universities and colleges is meant to do the same thing, I think, to help students explore critically, using all of their faculties, what it could mean to be personally fulfilled and ultimately to leave the world a better place than they found it. So let's see what we can do by exploring virtues and vices and successes and failures, hope and despair through a few great novels for the next 30 or 40 minutes, and then take the rest of the time to talk together about what we've learned. So I'll start with F. Scott Fitzgerald's last book, unfinished when he died at the age of 44, called The Last Tycoon. I do teach in a business school, so I try to make sure that I get business-related books. And one theme that I identify is how we can live a balanced life when there's so much to do. The 9-to-5 workday seems a relic of the past, if it ever existed. And Fitzgerald's novel does a good job of addressing this problem and putting it into a contemporary context. Ultimately, the title character fails, but there are some very helpful lessons along the way. So Fitzgerald models his tycoon, whom he calls Monroe Starr, on Irving Thalberg, the boy wonder of the music industry, who became head of production at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in 1924. And the story unfolds in the novel in the Hollywood of the mid-1930s. And the editor of a version of the book that I use explains that Monroe Starr is the archetypal American hero, the embodiment of the American dream, a J. Gadsby with genius. Early in the novel, there's an earthquake at 9 p.m. on a July night, which knocks out power and bursts water mains at the studio. And Starr, Monroe Starr, is still at work and immediately takes charge of the disaster response, though as the narrator puts it, he's gray with fatigue. By the end of the episode, he's standing near the studio exit as the night crew leaves. And Fitzgerald writes, "Men began streaming by him, every second one glancing at him, smiling, speaking, saying his name. He spoke and waved back as the people streamed by in the darkness, looking, I suppose, a little like the emperor. He was their man, the last of the princes, and their greeting was a sort of low cheer as they went by." He's also willing to take work time for very personalized responses to his employees, not only speaking to them, but literally curing their ills. He attends to a cameraman who tries to commit suicide and resolves the issue so this person, with a person who's so depressed. He works with a writer to cure him of writer's block. He helps save an actor's marriage. He also has social vision, raising tens of thousands of dollars from the studio's board of directors and sending a dozen studio stars to a benefit for those in the community whom the earthquake has left homeless. He convinces the same board to make a quality picture that he knows will lose money, on the other hand, but it will produce goodwill, he believes, for the studio. The downside of Monroe Starr's life, though, is that he works much too hard. He calls his work very congenial, and he enjoys working more than anything else. There's an ominous scene with his heart doctor, though, where Starr has the usual excuse for not taking his doctor's advice to slow up and rest. Well, in about 6 weeks, things will ease up. In fact, his heart condition is very serious, and the doctor thinks to himself, who could take him away and keep him away? It would almost surely be worthless. He was due to die very soon now. Within 6 months, one could say definitely. And what's the use of developing the cardiograms? You couldn't persuade a man like Starr to stop and lie down and look at the sky for 6 months. He'd much rather die. Monroe Starr is only 34 years old. There is someone who could take Starr away, though, and keep him away for a while. A good portion of the book is a love story, a story of growing feelings between Starr and Kathleen, a woman who first visits him in the studio as a tourist. And at one point when he's with Kathleen, Starr begins thinking this way, and I quote, he wanted the pattern of his life broken. He was going to die soon, like the two doctors said. And he wanted to stop being Starr for a while and hunt for love, like men who had no gifts to give, like young nameless men who looked along streets in the dark. So Starr comes to learn that Kathleen is engaged to another man who's soon to return to California to marry her. And despite herself, she's falling in love with Starr, and he with her. And Fitzgerald does this wonderful job of portraying reluctant lovers who find themselves inexorably drawn to each other. And then the plot reaches a dramatic denouement when Starr has an opening to ask her to marry him, and it's clear that she will say yes. He knew he could not let her go now, but something else said to sleep on it as an adult, no romantic. And the narrator murmurs in the background, it's your chance, Starr. Better take it now. This is your girl. She can save you. She can worry you back to life. And the narrator also tells us that unknown to Kathleen or Starr at the time, her fiancé will be arriving in California the very next day. But Starr resolves to sleep on the decision. He says to himself, we'll go to the mountains tomorrow afternoon. And then the narrative says, many thousands of people depended on his balanced judgment. You can suddenly blunt a quality you've lived with for 20 years. But at 2 o'clock the next day, he receives a telegram. I was married at noon today. Goodbye. So the next chapter has Starr deep in grief at having lost Kathleen, and it shows him also losing his business acumen in negotiations with a union organizer. And in fact, Starr gets drunk. He picks a fight with the organizer. He's knocked unconscious in the most sumptuous room of the studio. And that's where the book ends. Not because it was supposed to end there, but because Fitzgerald, the author, himself dies of a heart attack at the age of 44, with only half of a working draft of The Last Tycoon complete. living too hard was not just a problem for Fitzgerald's fictional character. So what's the antidote to overwork? A relevant question for all of us, I think, associated with Stanford and a Stanford education. I believe it's fulfilling relationships. And Monroe Star has come very close to saving his life through a loving relationship with Kathleen, but he let his busy business life take precedence to the ultimate detriment of both his business and his life. So let's try another novel where relationships look more promising. Willa Cather ends her 1913 novel, O Pioneers, with these words: "Fortunate country that is one day to receive hearts like Alexandra's into its bosom, to give them out again in the yellow wheat, in the rustling corn, in the shining eyes of youth." O Pioneers is a great American story. It's set in the heartland on the plains of Nebraska. As it begins in the 19th century, immigrants from a variety of European countries are trying to realize the American dream by taming the wild land. People whose heritage is Swedish, Norwegian, Russian, German, French, among them. Alexandra's father, John Bergson, lies dying at the age of 46, broken after losing his cattle in a blizzard, his hogs from cholera, a valuable stallion from a rattlesnake bite, and 2 sons to childhood illnesses. Rough there in the heartland. Not only that, but also his crops have failed time and time again. And on his deathbed, he calls his 3 adult children around him. "Boys," he says wearily, "I want you to keep the land together and to be guided by your sister. I want no quarrels among my children, and so long as there is one house, there must be one head. Alexandra is the oldest, and she knows my wishes." So his 2 adult sons are strapping and strong, but Alexandra is definitely the brains of the operation, helping to keep the farm sustainable while many others around the Bergsons fail in what seems to be a very hostile wilderness. The reader is told that in his daughter, John Bergson recognized a strength of will and a simple, direct way of thinking things out that was not present in his sons. And so reluctantly, but with confidence, he entrusted to her the future of his family and the possibilities of his hard-won land of 640 acres. Alexandra is also described as always attractively dressed, as physically beautiful, with a shining mass of reddish yellow hair. Over time, with her business sense and her love of the land, her imagination married to careful research, and her willingness to experiment and take calculated risks, Alexandra builds the family farm into one of the most successful and prosperous in the region. When others are losing faith and selling and running, Alexandra, over her brother's objections, is mortgaging the homestead to buy more land at rock-bottom prices. 16 years after her father's death, Alexandra's foresight has paid off. Her family has large holdings with telephone wires humming above white roads that run at right angles and create that vast checkerboard of what we now know as the breadbasket of America. I come from that part of the country originally, Illinois, a family from Iowa, farms in Iowa and Illinois. This is all dear to my heart. When the first of her brothers had married, the land was then equally divided as their father had asked on his deathbed. Now, how is Alexandra getting along in her relationships? First and foremost are her feelings for the land, which she approached, quote, with love and yearning. It seemed beautiful to her, rich and strong and glorious, and her eyes drank in the breadth of it. She felt as if her heart were hiding down there. Her best friend is, as she was growing up, is a younger boy named Carl, who leaves at the age of 18 to become an engraver in St. Louis. They were never romantically involved, but as Alexandra put it, we've liked the same things, and we liked them together without anyone else knowing. And we've had good times, hunting for Christmas trees, going for ducks, making our plum wine together every year. She also has a little brother, Emil, more than a dozen years younger than her two adult brothers, and she's more than 16 years older than Emil herself. Alexandra treats him like a son, and she grooms him to go away to college, where he becomes captain of the track team. He plays in the university band, and he prepares to go on to law school. Meanwhile, just before Emil goes to college, a childhood friend of his comes back from Omaha to live in the local area. Marie is a very attractive woman of Bohemian descent, now married, and Alexandra and Marie then develop a close friendship despite their age difference. Family relationships, relationships with friends for Alexandra. And 16 years after he leaves, Carl returns to Nebraska in transition from his engraving career to seeking gold in Alaska. And he's amazed to find out how prosperous Alexandra has become. And she's also very pleased to have him back. Secretly hopes that he'll stop traveling now, and maybe they might get married. But he keeps moving. And then in a terrible incident, Alexandra loses both her brother, Emil, and her friend, Marie. They're discovered to be lovers and shot dead by Marie's jealous husband. Carl hears of the tragedy of Emil and Marie and comes back from Alaska, where he spent the last year. And now finally, with Alexandra in her 40s, they decide to marry. And Alexandra says, I think I'll be very happy, Carl. I haven't any fears. I think when friends marry, they are safe. And Alexandra is saved in the end through relationships. They're not on the front burner all the time, and they do take a long time to develop, since her business really does come first. So let's try to push this a little further and get it a little better in a third novel about another pioneer, a modern figure in Jane Smiley's book called, or novella really, called Goodwill. And here there's love for the land again, but love for people in this case really does come first. And as the story opens, we learn that Bob Miller is a Vietnam War veteran who's returned to the land with his wife Liz, who is an Ivy League graduate, and their 7-year-old son Tommy. 19 years ago, presumably around 1970, Bob bought a 55-acre farm in Pennsylvania and decided to simply drop out of the regular economy and become entirely self-sufficient. He's determined to live lightly on the earth and fully respect his relationship to the environment. The family income before Tommy was born was around $150 per year, and it's now up to $350. As Bob says, you simply can't raise a kid on $150 a year. A kid likes to have nice school supplies, for example. And of course, there are property taxes to be paid, but the Millers grow their own food, they've built their own house, barns, shed, furniture. There's no electricity, there's no oil, there's no gas, but they heat with their own firewood that Bob chops. The Millers weave and knit their own clothes from the wool of their sheep and lambs and sheep. They barter with their neighbors. They've scrounged in the local area for cast-off tools and bicycles and fishing tackle, a stove, a canoe. And their vision for their family is simply to live a self-contained life in good-willed harmony with nature and the community around them. And Bob deeply loves his wife and his son. When Liz returns after being away during the day, he says, all I want to do is to meet her, kiss her, and walk her to the house. And he speaks of the pleasure of marriage, the pleasure of fatherhood. Regarding Tommy, he says, all of his life we've been devising things for his benefit. He calls Tommy receptive, appreciative, and flexible. He declares he's a good boy, and I love him. Regarding his wife, he explains, I've been in love with Liz for 12 years. We've disagreed and compromised and learned from one another. And one of the things I love most about her is how she suggests new possibilities to me after a moment of anger, as if they were speculations rather than issues. But the home relationship is not enough. Tommy's been attending the local elementary school, and this is where the Millers' idyllic life of goodwill starts to be challenged. First, Tommy brings home a note from his second grade teacher that he's torn apart 2 dolls belonging to a girl in his class. A month later, Tommy cuts up the same girl's new lavender winter coat with a pair of scissors in front of other children at the school. Bob has a rare moment of questioning his lifestyle, asking, I wonder what it would be like to raise a child with money. And one of the things that Tommy misses most is television. Bob explains to him that not only do the Millers not have electricity, but there would also be minimal TV reception where they are in the mountains. And Tommy responds that Annabelle, the person who he's done this damage to her coat and her dolls, Annabelle has a satellite dish, and they get 137 channels. So his father thinks he has the last word, and he says, that's 137 chances to get stupid. We'll go to the library on Saturday. At this, Tommy jumps up, knocks over his chair, and shouts, I hate reading. That's what's stupid, those books. The following day, Tommy sets fire to his classmates' family's satellite dish. And the fire then spreads to their house, which is burned to the ground. Now the tenor of the book changes dramatically. The Rears pushed a year ahead to find the Millers living in a 2-bedroom apartment in State College, Pennsylvania, with a television set. Tommy is attending a different school than Annabelle and seeing a counselor 3 days a week. Bob and Liz see the same counselor once a week as part of the terms of their custody arrangement with the state welfare department for keeping Tommy. Liz works in the bookstore at Penn State. Bob works as a carpenter at the university. And Tommy has a paper route. So what happened to this idyllic world of goodwill and close relationships? A book for which Bob had been interviewed before they left the farm described their life this way in the introduction. Bob Miller shows what must be a variety of genius in the single-minded way he's transformed his valley and his life to an expression of ideals that are often extolled but almost never realized. And yet Bob himself recognized after the fire, and I'm quoting here from him, all my habits of thought presented themselves simply as varieties of pride. Even the love I'd been so sure of for Tommy and for Liz, for the valley, for this work, this soil, this air, was primarily self-inflating. So it's humility that's missing in relation to child rearing, to his wife, to the creation of his perfect lifestyle, to the forces of nature, human and environmental. As a parent, Bob was blind to what the world looked like from his son's point of view. But Bob understood Tommy really as an experimental subject who could be molded to his own adult commitment to voluntary poverty. And the limit of that goodwill vision was not in giving careful attention to how his son was growing up and to what he was experiencing in relation to his peers and his community in the local public school. So maybe with one more novel, one final novel here before we start talking, we can put it all together. Satisfying work, time and attention to close personal relationships, family harmony, and beyond pride, true service to others. So I turned to Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, first published in 1922, set in India. Many of us have read Siddhartha probably more than once in our lives. Set in India around 500 BC, at the time of the historic Buddha, Gautama. The main character of the novel is not himself, the Buddha, although he has one of the names of the Buddha, Siddhartha. But this Siddhartha does actually meet the Buddha in the novel. He's born into a wealthy Hindu Brahmin family. He's handsome, he's intelligent, he's well-liked, and yet as he grows, he's increasingly discontented with his wealth and his privilege and the limits of his knowledge that the wise priestly caste has passed on to him. So when some samanas, nearly naked ascetics, pass through the town, I quote here from the book, with an atmosphere of still passion, of devastating service, of unpitying self-denial about them, Siddhartha and his friend Govinda join them. As Siddhartha's father reluctantly gives permission to him to go, he instructs, "If you find bliss in the forest, come back and teach it to me. If you find disillusionment, come back, and we shall again offer sacrifices to the gods together. Now go, kiss your mother." Practicing self-denial, meditation, and other techniques, Siddhartha over time is able to empty himself of all desires, move beyond attachment to self. Govinda and he selflessly serve others as they pass through various villages on their travels. And yet, ultimately, Siddhartha comes to question the Samana way, just as he'd questioned the Brahman way. Neither would lead to full enlightenment, to nirvana, he feels. Strangely, this next leads to Siddhartha becoming a wealthy businessman. But he does it utterly without ego attachment. He treats all, rich and poor, equally. He sees business as simply a game, which he enjoys playing, but not as something either about which to worry nor through which to take advantage of other people. And he also develops a relationship with a courtesan named Kamala, from whom he learns the art of lovemaking very well, and he generously compensates her for it. But then, after long living this life in the world without belonging to it, in his 40s, he succumbs to what the narrator calls the soul sickness of the rich. Property, possessions, and riches trapped him, I'm quoting. They were no longer a game and a toy. They'd become a chain and a burden, close quote. Interpersonally, he loses his kind-heartedness, his patience. He becomes hard and mean in his business transactions. He no longer feels he needs Kamala, who's beginning now to show signs of aging. So he takes off without saying goodbye to anyone. We find him next as an apprentice to a ferryman, taking travelers back and forth whenever they need to cross a great river. He begins to listen carefully to the river and to the other ferryman, who turns out to be an enlightened being, a bodhisattva himself. Yet, what can he learn about being enlightened himself if in the process he's forsaken his father and his mother? What can it mean to be enlightened if in the process Siddhartha has abandoned his best friend Govinda, as he did, to go off and find his own unique, precious way? What can it mean to be enlightened if he left Kamala, with whom he'd had an intimate sexual relationship for many years, merely because he'd become disillusioned in his work, and she'd started to show some signs of aging? It turns out that unknown to him, Siddhartha had actually left Kamala pregnant with their child, a son, when he walked out on her without a word. And then years after Siddhartha has become a ferryman, Kamala and her 11-year-old now son come to cross the river. But just as she gets near the ferry, she's fatally bitten by a snake and dies on Siddhartha's bed after he's identified and acknowledged their child. These novels, it's just, what are they just doing? So there, for the first time, Siddhartha truly learned something about love. And over a period of months with his son, Siddhartha tries to make a good home for him in the ferryman's hut and to help his son overcome his grief at his mother's loss. Siddhartha, in fact, loses his heart completely. He utterly forgets himself in his devotion to his son, but the boy cannot make a transition to this radically different lifestyle. He turns against his father, he runs away, and he never returns. And Siddhartha is wounded so deeply, he's sure that he can never recover. But he does remember how he left his own father and never returned. He personally feels the pain and suffering of his own long-deceased father, who died without ever seeing his son again. Luckily, as an old man, Siddhartha is reunited with his childhood friend Govinda. They have a fascinating discussion about love, with Govinda reminding Siddhartha that the Buddha forbade his disciples to experience love. Quote, he preached benevolence, forbearance, sympathy, patience, but not love. Love is a matter of worldly illusion, claims Govinda. But Siddhartha has now experienced these rich, deep, warm feelings of love, finally, with his son. Utter devotion when together, and this wounded heart at separation. And he's also felt deep grief, pain, and suffering when he thinks of his parents' love for him and how he betrayed it by never coming home again. And therefore, Siddhartha argues with Govinda. It seems to me, Govinda, that love is the most important thing in the world. And at the very end of the book, Siddhartha asks Govinda to kiss him on the forehead. And Govinda then has this kind of mystical experience as Siddhartha's face somehow merges with and contains a continuous stream of thousands of other faces, which he appreciates in each of their specificity. And Govinda emerges from this kiss with tears uncontrollably trickling down his face and this overwhelming feeling of earthly love for his friend, and through him, quote, of everything that he'd ever loved in his life, of everything that had ever been of value and holy in his life. So, in the end, Siddhartha is not only capable of love himself, but also of spreading it powerfully to other people. He does have satisfying work in ferrying people back and forth across this river and serving those who wish on a deep level by talking to them about enlightenment and the road to it. So my appreciation of this book is enhanced by reading the others, by understanding first how love was missing in the life of a great and conscientious business person in The Last Tycoon, by seeing how long Alexandra, the pioneer, struggled to get from cultivating her land to finding a life companion, by learning how easy it was for Bob's personal pride to get in the way of what felt like genuine love for his wife and his child. And these are just 4 books in the immense canon of great novels in the literature of the world. How much meaning can we find if we keep reading and reading and reading? But now let's spend some time talking and talking and talking, a critical part of what we're supposed to do in these universities, whatever our age. Thank you, and let's get you to the mics. Mic there, mic there. No. I want to get them to the mics because that way this is being recorded so that people will be able to hear it later. And if you, I'm used to as somebody who teaches in business schools. If you aren't really active in discussion here, I do cold calls and I'll get you engaged in this. Yes, sir.
As you know, most professors have an uncanny ability to know who's going to ask the next question. I enjoyed your metaphor of the jewel, the way novelists will look at a character and inspect the different facets. But the novels that you've mentioned seem highly structured towards argument, towards a statement about life, which you've been able, in a sense, to reduce for us. So I wonder if that idea that novelists only explore the human condition in its complexity without a reductive point of view is subject to question.
Fair enough. And I think the reductive point of view is mine. The reductiveness that you're hearing is me trying to make sense of these novels, trying to, in a short period of time here, put them together, to tie them in a way which I think helps us struggle with the issues that I think are important, reduced to McLennan's concerns. So indeed, that's true, the way I've presented them. I honestly don't think any of these novels are reductive in that sense, because they really do take these characters and we just see them turn and turn and turn. We see all kinds of things in each of these characters to admire and to be appalled by. We see things in their relationships that we are saying, oh, how can this be? And then at other times, how generous, how caring. I think, and none of them have I mean, maybe we could say with Siddhartha, because Hesse, the son of a Christian minister who sort of rebelled against that and had been enamored of religions of the East and of Buddhism in particular, maybe he had more of an attempt to try to, I don't think he's trying to make us all Buddhists, but to give us a different perspective on the world than he'd known as a European Christian. But no, I think these books really do a good job, and McLennan did the bad job of the reductive quality of it. So. Other questions, thoughts, critiques? Okay, it's time for cold call. Oh, no. Oh, you've got a question. Oh, no, it won't stop. Don't worry. People are going to be answering some questions if they're not answering right.
So I'm a great reader of novels. I mean, I love novels. I love to get involved and deeply into the plot and the what's going to happen next and how varied the characters are. Sometimes lately in our public life of the United States, it seems as if some of the characters that should be in novels are actually on stage right now, living and acting out what we only before would have thought was a novel as sort of a trope or something. So how do you help yourself get through these days with the little jewels of the books and then, make sense out of life
right.
like we're seeing it?
So I think, a lot of people talk about biography and maybe commentary and op-eds and a number of things as good ways for us to really understand the human condition, understand how we should be with each other, to develop our thinking. I've come to be convinced, I actually didn't read novels myself for decades until I got in this reading group and sort of reluctantly began reading some novels. And then ultimately was asked to start teaching novels, which I at first said, really? But I think that biography is great, and so are attempts of social commentary and to try to, in prose, figure out what's going on in our society now. But the beauty of novels, I think, is that because great artists are able to see us in all of the aspects of our life, not just the vices and virtues, but love life, our business life, what we're doing, inside our own head, inside the head of others. And if they're really good, they know the human condition in depth, and they really can describe that to us in a way that's very compelling, and I think provide better lessons for us than virtually any other way to act well in the world.
I want to start with a small story that you gave one time when speaking up in Marin County. Here we are at a great academic institution. When you said, I'm not sure you were faulting Yale, but you said when you applied to Yale, maybe you said night owl, smokers, non-smokers, but nobody said, would you like to room with a future world-famous cartoonist by the name of Gary Trudeau?
Right.
Love the story. Comment, question. Of the 4 novels, in each of the 4, I know more about some, less about others, there's a great strong parallel between the lessons that you pointed out and the personal life of the author. Scotty Fitzgerald died at 44, but had a relationship with Sheila Graham, a very important relationship after Zelda. So there was that personal side. I don't know Willa Cather, but Jane Smiley wrote 1,000 Acres, land in the Midwest. I have had land in the Midwest like you, based on the King Lear idea. So again, expanding into Shakespeare. And Hesse, lots and lots of things about Hesse, but his spiritual pursuit. So my question is there a parallel between the life of the authors involved and the works of fiction they created?
Absolutely. I mean, again and again, and that's one of the wonderful things to take real literature courses from real literature professors at a place like Stanford, not somebody who's a lawyer and a minister and uses novels to teach business ethics. But no, it's really true that so much of what you find in novels is from people's own life, and of course you'd expect that. That's where their knowledge is, that's where their experience is, that's where they have the cutting edge of issues for each of them. And we added Willa Cather, who grew up in Nebraska, who was very much a child of the Midwest, but then spent most of her life writing in New York City, sort of looking back at the Midwest. And she was very concerned as an early feminist with the role of women in society at large, and Alexander is her hero, and so on. So yes, indeed, very much connected to the writers and their own lives. When I teach, though, I try in my classes to say, I don't care about the authors. Just stay with the story, because they're so rich, and they were written by great artists with this kind of experience. If we get off into the author's life, we might as well be reading biography or doing something else. I want to just stay with the story. So I push people away from that. But of course, it's very, very true. And it's fascinating as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi, Scotty. Like you, I sort of came to novels a little later in life, after many years in business, which I still continue. But when my wife joined a book group, I piggybacked on what they were doing, and like you, became very enamored of the genre, if you will. So my question to you, and as I've read novels over the years, I've tried to learn a little bit from each of the characters, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, and tried on different personalities, different perspectives. So my question to you, and it's maybe, I don't know how fair it is, but who is your favorite novel character from a novel, and why?
Aha. Wow. I try to never answer such a question because there's so many great characters in great novels. I mean, if I'm really pressed, and you have pressed me, so I have to answer, I guess I would say Siddhartha. I am, very moved by this character and his life of just trying to get out there and experience and turn against all the wisdom of his parents, these religious traditions, the Buddha himself. He meets with the Buddha and, gets some good advice, but then says, no, I have to go do it on my own. There's something very compelling to me about that character and his struggles and his experiences, and ultimately, his enlightenment that I guess I would say is my favorite character. But, there are so many. I think as you first were talking, I was thinking of Ivan Illich, in The Death of Ivan Illich by Tolstoy. Maybe not another guy who dies in his mid-40s, but he's a lawyer, and he's a good lawyer, and he's upstanding, ethical, has a wife who he falls in love with. I mean, she's also from his own social background, so there's sort of an intermingling of social class and love. The 2.2 children, some children die, the picket fence in St. Petersburg. I mean, the whole sort of perfect life. But then he contracts a terminal illness, and we watch him in the process of dying. And boy, what you learn in that book about the meaning of life through watching somebody die is very powerful. So I turned to Ivan Illich a fair amount too.
I don't think I have a question, but I have some musings. So I was a creative writing major as an undergraduate, and Wallace Stegner was my advisor. And I remember one of the things he taught us, and he revealed to us, he said, which shocked me, he said when he started to write a book, he never knew, he didn't have the slightest idea where the book was going. He just sat down and began writing. Whereas, well, I was more of a short story writer, so I would come up in my mind with the end of the story, and then I would write the story backwards. And then once I had the story written backwards to the beginning, then I would sit down and start writing. So in the end, I wrote a novel, and one of the things I learned writing the novel is that I think when we read novels, we often think, wow, these writers are such great, wise people, and they have answers. And so they know the meaning of life, and so they're writing this book that teaches us the meaning of life. But what I found was that, and my narrator discovered, was that in what he was seeking, he spends this whole novel seeking, and in the end, rather than finding some answer, the answer finds him. And he's what is found. So
That is beautiful, and so many thoughts come up from that. First of all, the last thing you said is very spiritual from my, that other side of my being, which is, ultimately those of us who search for God don't succeed as well as those for whom are open and God finds us. So it's an interesting perspective there. But I think a lot of novelists say exactly that. They say, somehow this is coming to me from some other place. Obviously, it's through me and my experience, and as we said a moment ago, novels look very much like novelists' lives and so on. But that sense of it developing and coming out without you having started backwards and going to the beginning is quite compelling for a lot of novelists. And I did, the reference made to me as this character in the Doonesbury comic strip, because I had the just fortuity of being in a room for 3 years at Yale with a guy who became a cartoonist. He didn't mean to become a cartoonist. I mean, he wanted to be a great artist. And that came to him, actually, by a syndicate starting up and saying, we think you can do this little strip that this throwaway thing you were doing in the Yale Daily News could be national. And he said, that's just something I was doing on the side. I'm an artist. I'm going to art school and so on. They said, well, gee, you can make a little money for a couple of years before you go to art school with our syndicate. And he said, oh, okay. So he works for a couple of years, does go to art school with the money he's made, now has visions of himself as a great artist. He wins the Pulitzer Prize. He says, oh, well, I guess cartoons do have some substance and can be something, So just the way, and with his own characters, I've asked him about this, because he started just with his roommates in the strip when we were undergraduates at Yale. But then these characters, he's been doing this for more than almost 50 years now. So these characters have developed lives and interactions and so on. And I was saying, Gary, don't they sort of begin to dominate you, the stories of these characters? He wouldn't quite admit to that, because he's a very creative guy who knows what he's doing. But I think you can look at any of these great artists and see that it's an interplay between the creative spirit, the muse, if you will, historically, and their own control of their characters.
Yes, I've been a member of a wonderful couples book club for 30 years, which started when my husband, class of 54, came and took a seminar taught by Bill Chase called Humanities for the Business Executive, and it changed his life. He started reading novels and caring about people, and it was remarkable, the transition. But so this book club, the problem that we have had is that we find it increasingly hard to find new novels. I mean, we do often go back to the classics and love it. It always turns out to be promising and exciting. But we'd also, people keep tending to go to biography instead of novels, and we want to keep it novels. So do you have any recommendations or suggestions for how we could do that?
Well, I just keep, getting the book review in the New York Times, and there are new novels, lots of new novels every week that are coming out, and try to read those through and see what might interest me, and then go buy them and read them. And so, I know what you're saying. I mean, the classics are classic, and
right.
But we're only talking a lot of these novels I'm talking about. These are 20th century, so I mean they were brand new someday and one day, and actually a lot of these books didn't do well when they first came out. So I guess part of what you're saying is, well, let them, the test of time will then later tell us what's good to read. But I found Jane Smiley this Goodwill book just by reading the New York
That's
Times.
true.
Yeah, so that's probably my best suggestion is
New York Times, okay.
yeah. Or New York Review of Books or other places where people have reviewed books well.
My question is, so there's a criticism I've seen of novels, which is that they're written by novelists, right? By which what is meant is that, the kind of person who goes and becomes like a computational biologist, right, or a mathematician is very unlikely to write a novel, and vice versa. That novelists very rarely have experience in those fields. And I wonder, I work in a very technical field, and my impression is most of my coworkers do not read a lot of novels. And so I wonder, do you think that criticism is fair? Do you think novelists are able to speak to people who are doing things that are a little bit further outside of, I think, the standard set of experiences that novelists themselves have?
Well, I think the important point you're making is we need to read novels of people from very different backgrounds. I mean, I think of all this, the whole genre of science fiction, the Isaac Asimovs and so on, all the people who have written incredible, and going back, to the 19th century and so on, people who are scientifically trained and scientifically engaged or engineering engaged who've written great novels and in other genres. So you're right, a lot of novelists come out of places like Iowa, the writing school there, and they tend to be of humanities background. But there's a lot of great novels that are coming out of lawyers these days. It's amazing to me as an attorney who, maybe I should have been a novelist. But you need to find, you're right, people from other arenas than just classic English training to read. I wanted to follow, I don't know why what you just said reminded me of something, previous question, about finding meaning in novels and the novelists intending the meaning or not. Arthur Miller was great when asked about his plays. Well, what's the meaning of this? Or how does this work? Or what did you mean to say about that? He said, I don't know. I just wrote the play. I don't know. You figure that out. If I knew that, I'd be doing, I'd be like a clergy person. I'd be something else, I just write. But and it just comes out of me, and I write, and I try to, describe the human condition. But, if you're finding moral lessons and so on, that's your business. Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think that Siddhartha, the character, read in his later life?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the character of Siddhartha also read any kind of books, fiction, in his later life? Or what do you think of the balance between learning from fiction and learning from relationships, from business, from other parts of life?
Right. There's no evidence that he ever read anything, textual evidence that Siddhartha ever read any novels, or of course there were no novels there. Read the great Hindu classics, although he must have. I mean, he was trained as a Brahmin, so Mahabharata and Ramayana and all the great mythology of India he must have been well aware of. But I'm not sure if he kept reading in any sense. But your further question is, how do you put novels together with our daily life? I think quite well. I mean, presuming that we're not so much what one would call, my parents used to call me, a bookworm, who's hidden away somewhere and not out, as my parents often encouraged me, to get out and play with the other kids, don't just, read in your room. So yeah, obviously you need to live a full life and have those novels join the book group, and once a month, talk with other people about the novels that you've been reading. But yeah, it's an interplay back and forth. But I think an important interplay. Yes. Last question. We're almost out of time.
I was an English major here, and I'm a lawyer, and I now produce concerts. And I'm here celebrating my law school reunion, and we're all in our late 50s. And people say, what do you do? What do you do? And so, I have an answer for that question. But last night I found myself saying, there are whole bookstores and libraries filled with books that I am never going to read. And that bothers me increasingly. So I don't really, haven't had good experiences with book groups because I feel sort of hijacked onto, 800-page biographies that I really don't care about reading. And I'm wondering, how would you sort of in a comprehensive way approach all these bookstores and libraries? I'm sure I can go through the New York Times review of books, or I can walk through the aisles and find books that interest me. But is there a way of sort of putting it all together in a way that kind of makes sense?
There are some great adult education courses online which sort of put them together and package them and give you the sense of genres and so on. But I really do think doing it in community at our age, or I don't presume you're my age, but I think and maybe you need to start your own book group of short novels.
Right.
That's all we're going to do. Novels less than 200 pages, and that's what we're going to do. Yeah, not get hijacked that way. Yeah. Thank you very much. We are out of time. I appreciate it.